And then what happens is that later on, when we discover that there are other points of views that are equally valid and make sense, we feel like we have been tricked or duped because it's like, why didn't anyone ever tell me that? You don't hear those things because there's a fear baked into, if you found out, maybe you might believe the wrong thing. And what I actually think is the most detrimental thing about that is, like I said earlier, it robs you from the ability to have discernment. Hey, everybody, welcome to Whiskey in the Writings. My name is Joe. I'm your host, and today we're going to talk about how to actually read the Bible without getting stuck or giving up. And if that's a question you've had because maybe you've wrestled with reading the Bible on a consistent and regular basis, this might be the episode for you. But before we get into our topic today, we're going to introduce the whiskey that we're drinking, and I'm really stoked to share this one with you. We're actually going to do an opening on this episode. Sometimes I buy a bottle and I bring it out and I haven't even opened it yet and haven't tasted it yet. That's one of these cases. So we're going to talk about the whiskey. Before I get into the whiskey, though, let's talk about my tumbler that I'm drinking out of. This is a wood tumbler that was a gift to me from my good friend Caleb. So Caleb, if you're watching, thanks. I'm using your tumbler as my initial J there. For Joe. It's a group of us that, obviously, right? It's a group of us that get together on a semi-regular basis when we can. Lives get busy, but we get together and we like to talk about the Bible, of course. I've talked about that on this channel before, but I'm drinking out of the tumbler that you gave me, Caleb, just to say thank you, featuring it on this channel. So I got that. All right, let's talk about the whiskey now. This, dude, check out this beautiful bottle of whiskey. We were at the liquor store, just browsing the shelves, trying to see something that we could get that's new or unique. And Jane saw this bottle and called it out, and they only had one left on the shelf. And I'll just tell you what, immediately, it just caught my eye. The shape, the design, it reminded me of like a genie bottle. But what this is modeled out off of a pot still, which is part of the process of this company, how they make their whiskey. They use bottles like this. And so that's kind of where the design comes from. But this is called a Willett. It's a Kentucky straight bourbon. And it is a part of what's called the Pot Still Reserve. And so they have different variations of their bourbon, like most bourbon makers do. This is their Pot Still Reserve. And I'm really excited to try this today with you. Jane's a little bummed that she's not trying it with me. Tried to get her on the channel, but she wouldn't join me for this part. But nonetheless, we'll share some with her after the episode's recorded. But so Willett, this is Kentucky Straight Bourbon in this pot still bottle. And we're going to open this thing up for the very first time. I don't know if you've ever had this. I've never even seen it before. So I'll tell you what, I'm buying this for the looks right out of the gate. I don't even know if it's good. I've never even heard of Willett as a Kentucky bourbon. So all of this is new to me. But again, I just couldn't get over how cool this bottle was. This is like the kind of bottle you save after it's gone and you just kind of maybe, I don't know, put a flower in it or something. I don't know. I just don't want to get rid of it. But all that to say, here we go. Let's, okay. Yeah. Pretty classic. There's some sweetness in there that I can smell already, which is great. I just feel so cool pouring this. No, not too much. I just poured that like it was a soft drink. All right. Should we put some back? I'm going to leave this in too. And you guys are going to watch me. That was just a little too much. Okay, that's good. Okay. All right, enough to sip on there. I wish you could see it. The color is beautiful. Gosh, what is the age on this and proof? The proof on this has a batch number. Let's see, small batch, bourbon, made in Kentucky, batch number, bottled, Willamette, Willett. What is the proof on this? I don't even know. All right. I'm trying to see here. I'm going to read it. Let's see if I can find it. What's the alcohol content? That'll tell me what the proof is. Okay, so 94 proof. 94 proof is what this is. So almost up to the 100. You know me, I like 100 proof, my bottle and bonds. But what we've got here is just a fancy bottle, hopefully a delicious whiskey. Let's taste it and find out. It smells really good. Okay. That's got a ton of rich flavor. A little burn going down, not bad. I taste like notes of vanilla and honey. It's got a smooth finish. This is a great whiskey, guys. All right, there you have it. Willett. This is their Pot Still Reserve. It'll run you anywhere from maybe 50 to 60 bucks. It's kind of their lower shelf out of that, which is kind of a medium high for me, at least in my price range in buying a whiskey. So great introduction to this. Super rad bottle. Really like it. All right, whatever you've got in front of you, pour your drink responsibly, and let's dive in. All right, we'll move that out of the way. Okay, so we're talking today about reading the Bible. It's a topic I cover in lots of videos, actually, and try to undo and maybe provide more helpful, actionable ways to think about reading the Bible. Because as a Christian, or if you grew up in church, this is like the thing that you need to do, right? So there's go to church. Those are high priorities for churches. There is prayer. That's a big thing. Are you praying? Are you talking to God? But really, in most churches, reading the Bible is the number one task to do as a Christian, is to read your Bible, read your Bible, read your Bible. And those who talk about reading the Bible talk as if that's always easy to do. And can I just say, let's be honest. Reading the Bible is not as easy as people make it out to be. It can be, it can be sometimes boring. You're just reading it and you're going, oh, I don't even know what's going on here. It can be confusing. It's a writing that was written to people who lived in a time and a place that are so far removed from what we know and what we see that it just, some of the patterns and the traditions can just be super confusing. It can seem out of touch with the reality of our own lives and the world around us. So there's a lot going into this thing that it's just not a simple thing to say, well, you should be reading your Bible more. And I hinted at this a little bit when I made a video about the stages that we go through in our reading the Bible and spiritual growth. And one of those stages was the early exciting part where you're just diving into all the stories and how that just, can only hold you so long until it there's a steep drop off to that way of that, early, onboarding and exciting part of your new faith. But the honest truth is that if we're going to take the Bible seriously, which I think people want to do when they pick up their Bibles, they want to take it seriously because the pastor's been telling them that this is the source of truth for their lives, and that it is the thing that they need to spend the most time to get to know God doing, that you need to know your Bible. I mean, how many of you have ever felt inadequate or insufficient because you didn't know a story a certain way, or you don't know the books in any particular depth? It's this thing that's talked about all the time in churches. And actually, I just want to say it's hard to do. I'm someone who has spent, the 3 decades of my life trying to study and teach this thing. And I'm still learning new and exciting things about this thing we call a Bible. And so I just thought this video would be one where I can maybe give a couple tips in how to read this thing so that you don't give up and you don't burn out when you're attempting to take in the information that's contained in these writings, because I actually do believe that the writings here, what has been handed and passed down, is exactly what we should have. N.T. Wright is the one who has said that the most that I've heard, is that the Bible that we have today is the Bible that God wanted us to have. Um, and what that means is that it, in all of its complexities and what feels like inconsistencies and the outdatedness of it all, is still, in fact, the thing that God wants us to have. And so I think it's important and it's valuable that if we're going to take the Christian faith seriously, we've got to take the Bible seriously. And I know that you've heard that in churches because that's been used as a club to make you feel insufficient, inadequate, or not enough in your spiritual journey. I understand that. And so when I say to take the Bible seriously, I actually think there's more happening than what you get on a Sunday morning. And if all you use the Bible for is, your how-tos or your 10 ways to live a better life kind of sermon-y type way of reading it, it makes sense that you get burnout on it. It makes sense that it gets confusing because you're going to read stories that are just super jarring and difficult to digest and understand. You're going to read writings that are complex and diverse. And so to take the Bible seriously is to move from a self-help way of reading the Bible and to begin to explore the complexity that this Bible offers us. And so that's, what we do on this channel. Obviously, we want to explore things that maybe you're not going to hear on a Sunday morning, but I want to give some tips because I think it's important. And, just some brief kind of things I'll say about this. Genre is important when it comes to trying to read the Bible. And it's one that gets overlooked because what happens is that for most people, when they open up a Bible, one, they'll stick with the New Testament, and that's fair because the sayings of Jesus can be pretty straightforward and those are easy to digest. So we stick within the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. If I was talking to someone that this is their first time really trying to take the Bible seriously and learn the things that are written in here, I would start them with a gospel. If that's you, if you're like, I think it's time that maybe I can pick this thing back up again, I would encourage you to start in the Gospels, to start with Jesus. It's approachable, and yet there's so much that you can spend months and years and not even getting all of the layers that are happening in the life of Jesus. But so I'd start in the Gospels, but what you have in the Gospels is a what's called an ancient biography genre, and that word "ancient" in front of biography is important. I've talked quite a bit about how the Gospels are ancient biographies. I think I would tag one more word to that. I would argue that they're theological ancient biographies. I think that the gospel, those who wrote these things, these stories, compiled these things about Jesus's life and his death and his resurrection, are trying to make a theological argument about who Jesus is. So there's a bent towards convincing you about Jesus. So they choose certain stories and they leave stories out. They're not trying to tell you all about Jesus. They're not trying to tell you about every little nitty-gritty detail that you might get in a modern biography. So, there's ancient biographies I might call theological ancient biographies, or what the Gospels are. But that's important to understand, right? Because that means that the Gospel writers can take liberties and they can do things with stories that they're not trying to be literalistic. They're not trying to be a video camera recording some hidden camera that, GoPro footage of Jesus's life, where you're getting all of it in a chronological sense. And the writers of the Gospels, they don't even hide that. They know what they're doing. They talk about that in the writings themselves. They highlight the reason why they're telling you these stories. And so I think that's important, because if we're trying to read the Gospels through a lens of a chronological, GoPro cam footage of Jesus's life, we're gonna be confused. It's gonna be it's not going to add up. John's gospel is completely out of sync in alignment with chronologically with the writings of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And that's just because John's trying to do something else. And that's okay. We have to give them permission as the authors to do it the way they wanted to do it, and not hold them accountable because it doesn't map onto modern sensibilities that we have when we read things like biographies. And so that's really important to understand. Genre is important. Another genre that's helpful to understand, and there's a reason why I'm telling you this, but another genre is apocalyptic literature, okay? So that's just a term that is a style of writing that uses metaphor, symbolic language to communicate a greater truth, to reveal a greater truth. So the word apocalypse is the word. It means to reveal in Greek. And so when you get the English word is revelation, to reveal, to revelation. The Greek word is apocalyptic, and that word means to reveal or to uncover something that was hidden. And to do that literary style uses a lot of symbolic and graphic ways of communicating that truth that they're trying to reveal. So when you're reading Revelation, the goal isn't to ask, is this real history? The goal is to ask, what is the story they're trying to reveal about this situation? And one day I'll do a video on Revelation. I have a lot of thoughts about the writing Revelation. That'll probably get me a lot of views, I suspect, and a lot of clicks, and maybe a lot of hate. But because of the way that they use literature, it should make sense to us that we get things like dragons and fire and all this real graphic ways of communicating a certain truth. And so that's apocalyptic literature. Daniel, the writing of Daniel in the Old Testament, uses apocalyptic literature. Other writers uses apocalyptic literature. So genre is important. Then you got, your basic genres that we all know about. There's things like poetry. There's things like history. There's prose discourse. There's these different literary devices that are used to communicate based off of the writing that you're reading. And sometimes, and here's where it gets a little difficult, right? Guys, this is where it's not as straightforward as you may think when you read the Bible. And this is why people get frustrated, and this is why people give up. But even in some writings contained in a certain writing, you may have 3 different genres appear. You may get history, you may get poetic, and you may get apocalyptic, all in the same writing. So the writers have the freedom to bounce between genres. And that's hard for us, because when we read a certain genre of literature, it usually doesn't bounce to maybe real history and then poetic and then back to history and then to apocalyptic vision, and then all these things wrapped up into one. But that's what you get in the writings of the Bible. So it can get complex, because if you're not paying attention, you may be reading something that's poetic as history and confuse it as literal. So it can get tough, right? But genre is important. And so if you're someone that wants to take the Bible seriously, you need to know genre. You need to ask the question, what I'm about to read, what genre would this fall into? because if it's a certain genre, it can reframe your brain into understanding that. Now, there are tools to help you with that. Okay. So there are tons of study Bibles out there that you can buy on Amazon that can assist you in understanding that background. And don't skip over it. That information is so valuable for you to know as you go into reading it. I mean, I can't tell you, even in my own life, when I would get a study Bible, I would just skip right to the biblical text, right? And I would gloss over these introductory pages that help shape what this thing is about. And it wasn't until later that I was taught, like, don't skip over that. You need to know that if you're going to read this writing well. And there are tons of them out there. I got a whole shelf. I've got the NLT Study Bible is a great one. I'll link to that in the show notes. My favorite, obviously, is the NET with the study notes. And I've made videos about that. So you can go back in the channel and find, my recommendations for those sorts of things. But you may need one of those to start you out, to get your brain trained on these sorts of conversations. So that's a layer one to all of this is simply like knowing that genre is important and knowing what genre you're reading when you go into reading it. Okay, so I want to give you two ways to read the Bible where you don't get frustrated, you don't get lost, and you don't give up. And this is something that maybe you've not heard before. Maybe you have, but I just want to introduce it to you because I think it'll be helpful. All right, so let's get into point number one. Okay. When you open up and you begin to read a passage, a section, I want to encourage you to read narratives as narratives. Read narratives as narratives. What do I mean by that? Okay. A common mistake I see in people who go about trying to read the Bible is they read by chapter and verse. The method of reading is chapter and verse based. And a lot of that is behaviorally introduced. It's driven by watching the pastor preach chapter verse. Go to 2 Samuel chapter 16, and we're going to start at verse 2, and we're going to read verse 2 through verse 4, and I'm going to pull out my 2 cents about what I think that's saying in connection to the point I want you to learn today. And that inherently isn't bad, but it can go wrong in a lot of ways. And so when I say read narrative as narrative, I want to encourage you that if you start reading about the life of Samuel, read all of his life. If you're going to open up and read about the life of David, read all of the life of David. Don't just go one chapter or one verse and pull out a pull quote and try to make sense of it. Because narratives are a way of communicating a truth, a wisdom that we can learn from it. But if you just take the beginning part of David's life and you try to make it a pull quote of how David slays giants, and so that means I can slay giants, you can miss so much more of what's going on through the person of David that is happening as an adult, as a king, and how that story progresses and moves into spaces and into territories that you never even thought it would go. How does a person who is called out by God to be the anointed king, to replace the former king, how does that person who has the boldness and the fearlessness to honor God in his name move into a place where he rapes and has a husband murdered? And then how does that person come out of that story? And what is the repercussion of that? What happens to David? Well, God has to limit what he is able to do and building a temple. And so there's these narratives about the life of Jesus from beginning to end that those stories matter. I mean, you wouldn't start a movie and a half hour into the movie stop and go like, oh, well, I guess I know it all now. I know what's going to happen in this movie. I mean, I know some of you can probably predict pretty well what happens in movies, but you understand my point. Like, we don't do that with anything else in our lives. You don't pick up a book that you're just a narrative in a book and you just read a quarter of it and go, well, I guess that's it. And then you move on to something else. No, finish the narrative. Read narratives as narrative. And here's another thing I want to give you permission to do. You can jump around in stories of the Bibles, in the Bible, stories in the Bible. For instance, I may focus for a month on, let's just say, Cain and Abel. And you may say, a month on Cain and Abel? Yeah. But Joe, isn't that like half a chapter? Yeah. Genesis chapter 3. I mean, we're looking here. I'll just turn to it. Genesis chapter 4. I'm sorry, not 3. Chapter 4, the whole story of Cain and Abel is 16 verses. 16 verses, okay, about their lives. But what's more than that is that then there is narrative about what happens to Cain that finishes out the rest of chapter 4 and Cain's descendants. All of that matters because when you're reading that, instead of just taking, one little verse and you're trying to understand the narrative flow, so much depth and conversation can come from that. So many questions can come from that, Questions like when it starts out, it says, at the designated time, so this is verse 3, at the designated time, Cain brought some of the fruit of the ground for an offering to the Lord. But Abel brought some of the firstborn of his flock, even the fattest of them. And the Lord was pleased with Abel and his offering, but with Cain and his offering he was not pleased. So Cain became very angry, and his expression was downcast. Okay, right there, that's what? 3 verses, 3 through 5. Right there, how many questions can you think of? One glaring question is, why are they making offerings to God? Who taught them that that's something a person does? Where did they get that from? Why did they think it was a valuable thing to God? Did God ask them to do that? Where did that come from? Why is God pleased with one offering but not another? Why was Cain getting angry about this? Why did that enrage Cain? Why does it say his face was downcast? What does that mean? Well, I could stop there, or I can keep reading the rest of the narrative, right? So the Lord said to Cain, well, why are you angry? Why is your expression downcast? Is it not true that if you do what is right, you will be fine? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at the door. It desires to dominate you, but you must subdue it. So now all of a sudden, wait a minute, we're talking about what's right to do and wrong to do, and that there's this thing called sin that's lurking after me. So there's so much going on here that the encouragement is to read it and then read it again and then read it again. You can turn to stories like, here's Samuel. You can go into Kings and you can read about David. You can read these histories. When you're reading Job, if you're reading Job, Job's a big book, absolutely. But don't just read a few chapters. Read it from beginning to end. I guess that's the encouragement I'm trying to say. Is there some narratives that's easy to read from beginning to end, like the Cain and Abel story, right? It's one chapter of an entire book of the Bible. Whereas you got the story of Joseph. The story of Joseph covers the largest chunk of Genesis is the story of Joseph. Why is that the largest chunk? But stay in the entire narrative. Read it from beginning to end. And what'll happen is that will actually get you thinking about the meta-narrative that these stories contain. Why did they tell these stories? Familiarize yourself from beginning to end. Knowing one part of a story is is again, it's like you're introduced to a character within any other narrative, and then you just move on to another book without actually seeing the formation of that character and where that leads and what comes from it. Because once you start thinking of these things like these narratives, the way that they're written and reading them in their entirety, it it gives you a vision of the story that you may not have if you're just reading chapter and verse and you're moving on. This is why I don't think personally the Read the Bible in a Year programs are helpful. Okay, so the pushback is always like, "Well, Joe, you got to do it once in your life." I don't know, right? All my friends have done it. I've read the Bible in a year. But I don't think it's actually helpful, because what it does, it's like, today I'm reading 10 verses in this letter, and then I got to jump over to New Testament and I got to read 2 chapters there, and then I got to go back to Psalms and I got to read a few chapters there. And what happens is that can be discombobulating. It can be like you don't actually understand what's going on. And so my encouragement to help, so you don't get lost and you don't give up, is spend time in the narrative, in the full narrative. Move slow. Take your time. Don't feel like you got to rush it. There's no prize at the end of I did it, and God high fives you and you move into a special tier of Christianity. You get your badge check. That's just not how it works. Take your time. Be slow. Read the narratives in their entirety before you move on, and take your time in them. Know the story of Saul. What's going on with Saul? Why was he picked? Why did they need a king? And why did they land on Saul? And what happened to Saul that caused him to lose the kingdom? And why? And that leads you into a David narrative. And so they're all over the place in the Bible. And so I just want to say, read the narrative as a narrative. Take that chunk of that story and think through it, and then begin to ask the questions of what is this story trying to reveal to me? What is this story opening up that I can see, that will lead me towards wisdom in God's ways? So that's okay, that's narratives. But you might be sitting here and you go, but Joe, what about the parts that are not narrative? And I'm particularly thinking of, I've already kind of gave my spill on the Gospels, but let's talk about the back portions of your New Testament, your Bible's called the letters. And you just have a bunch of letters. So if I were to say, read the narratives as narrative, read the entirety of those stories, stay with those stories, I would say read the letters as letters. Okay, wow, super creative, Joe. But this is what I mean by this. Again, we treat the letters like these pull quotes of proof texts that I can use as a weapon towards someone else. And what happens is that many of us don't even know who these were written to, why they were written to them, the cities that existed at that time, the ways that those cities functioned, the way they lived their lives religiously, culturally, all of that stuff is lost. And the reality of all of these letters, you've got Ephesians, Corinthians, you have your Romans. I mean, there's just all of them. These letters are written to Christians in geographical locations. It would be like me walking up to your mailbox, in wherever city you are, in Portland or, in Seattle or Texas. And I grab that letter and then I bring it back to Boise and open it up and start reading it. And if I don't understand maybe the language or the culture of that area, it's a high degree chance that I'm going to get lost. I'm not going to understand certain phrases or terms, or how those terms are used for that people that it's written to. So when I say read the letters as letters, I'm encouraging you to understand that if I'm going to open up Corinthians, I should understand that this is a city to a people group called Corinth. And what was Corinth about? What were they like? Where was it geographically? why was Paul writing them in the first place? You have things like, even like the letters, the personal letters of you have Timothy. Well, where was Timothy at? Well, he was in a city called Ephesus. So Paul's writing his good friend who is trying to lead the community of believers in this town of Ephesus. And so the things that Paul says to Timothy matter to that people group in Ephesus. And so, these things are important because they help create space in our brains to reconcile the hard and difficult parts. And again, if you're like, well, Joe, how am I supposed to know what city this is and what that city was like? Listen, there's so much information. Again, grab any study Bible, and it's going to have a preface to any letter that's going to go into like, here's who wrote it, who it was written to, what city it was written to. This is what the city was like. An NIV study Bible. I would stay away from an ESV for other reasons, but an NET, an NLT, New Living Translation study Bible is great, and an NIV is a great one too. So they all put them out there. You can get them, but it'll start pointing you in a direction to not just read these letters as something that is pulled away from history, but something that lives within history, within a physical time and space where people wrestled with real things for their day and age that may not be the things that we wrestle with in our day and age. And so much like, read narrative as a narrative, read it in its entirety, read it as a whole. Stop pulling out chunks and trying to like over spiritualize, like, oh, now I'm like David and fighting my own Goliaths. No, understand that the author is trying to do something much bigger and much more beautiful than you can even imagine with those pull quotes. When you're reading the letters by Paul and others, remember that they're written to people that lived in a certain place in a certain time, and it will only enhance your ability to understand the confusing parts when you understand who he's talking to and why he may say it the way that he said it. Those things are important. So those are a couple things. I'll end with a couple thoughts as well. Thought number one, when you're reading the histories, let's just say 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, and then you have what's called the Chronicles, 1 and 2 Chronicles. When you're reading those, can I just encourage you to really lean into this reality of a conversation about identity, that those writings, I mean, Samuel and Kings probably is a very true history. Chronicles is a retelling of that history through a specific lens, and the lens is a conversation about identity. Who are we and where do we belong? One of the things that you can spend time learning about that will help you through some of these like back end portions of even like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all of these prophets type writings, especially things like Zechariah and Hosea, these prophets, is to remember that these people were speaking to a people group that had lost their identity. They had lost who their calling was. And the latter prophets are trying to draw the people back into proper worship and relationship with God, Yahweh. So to learn the history of the exilic period, which is basically when Assyria took over Israel, the northern kingdom, and then subsequently after that, Babylon took over Judah, the southern kingdom, and exiled people out of those places. What did that mean for their identity? And what did that mean for being a chosen people? And then when they're allowed to return, how do we get back to being those people? And how do we not forget what led us out into exile. These are the backgrounds of what these writings are about. They are written to address a people group trying to rediscover and remember who they are, and so if that's helpful at all, because sometimes you can open up like, gosh, I'll just even flip to, all right, here's Hosea, and it's like all of this prophetic language. What am I going to do with you, O Ephraim? What am I going to do with you, O Judah? For your faithfulness is as fleeting as the morning mist. It disappears as quickly as dawn's do. Therefore, I will certainly cut you into pieces at the hands of the prophets. I will certainly kill you in fulfillment of my oracles of judgment. For my judgment will come forth like the light of the dawn. For I delight in faithfulness, not simply sacrifice. I delight in acknowledging God, not simply in whole burnt offerings. What is happening here? What does that even mean? I mean, gosh, I love that I just turned to that. If we're having a conversation about sacrificial offerings, this would be a fun one to come back to. But the thing is, like, you can read that and go, what the heck is going on? Well, what's going on from a meta-narrative perspective is Hosea is offering commentary on the lack of faithfulness of God's chosen people, which leads into exile. And when they return, they need to be reminded of, like, hey, remember how we were unfaithful? We've got to return to faithfulness to God, rebuild the temple, reestablish ourselves as a people, and this is how we do it. And so even like Ezra and Nehemiah is a lot about that. How do we come back and be the faithful people that God called us out to be? So that's some of that. The last thing I'll say in regarding the, like, how do we not get lost and how do we not give up, especially, and that's the big one for me. Don't give up. It's not as easy as people tell you. Okay, it's just not. And so can we admit that and then actually work towards learning? Actually work towards understanding. Take time with it, because trust me, the payoff is so huge when you realize how deep and amazing and always coming alive in new ways for you, the more you begin to learn. And so I'll end with this last maybe statement or encouragement to you is be someone who asks a lot of questions. It's okay for you to ask questions. So when you come to parts of the Bible that you're like, what does that even mean? That's a great question to ask. And instead of getting discouraged, have conversations with people. Again, turn to literature. There's so much out there that you can digest and learn about. And the reason why I think in some ways, the reason why that pastors tend to shy away from this is because there's the fear that if you learn too much or if you learn the wrong things, you're gonna turn your back on God. That's the fear. At the end of the day, why pastors say don't read that book or don't watch that video or don't do that thing is because what they believe they're doing is protecting you. But the reality is that they are preventing from you the ability to have discernment. And so when you ask questions, you are often led to places of thoughtful interaction towards what the answer might be. So, gosh, there have been so many books I've read that I go, oh, I liked, chapters 10 and 8, but dude, the rest I didn't agree with. It's not where I was at. That's okay. It's okay for you to wrestle through the questions and hear different perspectives. Because oftentimes what happens is that in churches, we feel like if all we ever hear is that one-sided point of view, then we will begin to believe that that's the only point of view. And then what happens is that later on, when we discover that there are other points of views that are equally valid and make sense, we feel like we have been tricked or duped, because it's like, why didn't anyone ever tell me that? Why didn't anyone ever tell me that there's a different way to think about the atonement of Jesus? Why didn't anyone tell me that there are different beliefs on what eternal damnation looks like and hell? And, why didn't anyone tell me that there are different views on how to get baptized? No, because you don't hear those things because there's a fear baked into, if you found out, maybe you might believe the wrong thing. And what I actually think is the most detrimental thing about that is, like I said earlier, it robs you from the ability to have discernment. You're just turning into someone who's just being told what to believe, and instead of actually knowing what you believe, and then actually making a decision for yourself whether or not to believe it. And can that be scary? Absolutely. Right? Because it's like all we want is certainty. All we want is to know that what I believe is the right thing so I can put my head down at night and feel good about it. But the reality is that faith isn't about the right belief. Faith is about a journey towards a relationship. It's about trusting. It's about engaging with uncertainty and the unknowable, and still choosing to trust a path forward towards Jesus in the midst of uncertainty and doubt. And so I'll just throw that out there to say, be someone who asks lots of questions. If you're reading your Bible and you don't have questions, you're probably not reading it well. That's just the truth. If you're reading it and you're not like, what the heck did I just read? What does that even mean? What is this? Why is God condoning this sort of thing? Why doesn't God step up and do something? What's happening here? Who are these people? If you're not asking questions, you're just not reading the Bible well. And so ask the questions and be ready to go on a journey. So all that to say, I know that the Bible can be frustrating. I know that people can put it down too quickly, but I want to invite you to read narratives as narratives, read letters as letters, understand the genres of the writings that you're engaging with, and get good at asking lots of questions. I want to thank you for being a part of Whiskey and the Writings on this episode. I want to wish you a wonderful week, wherever you're at, whatever you're doing. Take care. If you want more from Whiskey and the Writings, head over to storiesoftove.com. It's our parent company where you can get different articles that I've written, posts that are shared, and just a lot of more stuff. So at any rate, really cool bottle we're drinking today. I'm going to go share some with Jane. We'll see you next time on Whiskey and the Writings. Cheers.